The murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson has revealed a simmering anger with the American healthcare system.
Moderators on Reddit have deleted a thread on the murder of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, who was shot and killed in Midtown Manhattan last week. A medicine thread on Reddit was closed after commentators criticized and even satirized Thompson's alleged denial of healthcare coverage to sick Americans to make profits.
Many posts, including from doctors and medical professionals, shared critiques of Thompson's business
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I'm Jason McCoy, your host of Put 'em on the Couch. Sitting right in front of me is my good friend, colleague, and better half,
Nelson Beaulieu.
Nelson Beaulieu. How are you doing this 18th day of December 2024?
I'm good. I should start out by wishing my wife a happy anniversary. It's our 20-year anniversary on December 20th.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
12/20.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let the gift giving proceed.
No, we don't give each other gifts for our anniversary.
Right. You guys are
We don't do that.
greedy bastards during your anniversary. Probably have nothing left after prepping for Christmas, huh?
No, we're pretty broke like everybody else,
most
right?
Americans. Hey, speaking of Christmas and gift giving, I want to thank all of our listeners for sharing, listening to, commenting on this last episode that was put out really just about 72 hours ago, Nelson. We are pushing 200 downloads across all major platforms.
Nice.
So that's exciting news. We really do appreciate the support and love you're showing
Absolutely.
us. You know, in lieu of gifts, in lieu of monetary payments, I ask that each and every one within earshot of my voice listens to, downloads, ranks, reviews,
Likes and subscribes.
likes, subscribes, follows. I mean, at the very least, share our content, particularly this latest one on gift giving. I think it was a particularly good one. I think we actually had a coherent message about the value and importance of showing empathy and compassion. Not
And
just
most
during the holiday
importantly,
season,
I was
but-
better than you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, today I have no doubt you're going to be better than me because we're going to talk about what the news coverage at the top of the hour from the site The Hill mentioned, and that's greed.
Yeah, I actually thought about doing, when I pitched this idea to you with gift giving, I thought about coupling it with this exact topic
Yeah.
because A, they go hand in hand, and B, look, don't cut this, but this is important. There is some sick shit going on in America when it comes to corporate greed, and in particular with healthcare.
I'm sorry, your cancer could be cured, but we need to wait for the insurance company to approve your chemotherapy.
Whoa,
It is some
you
sick,
heard it here.
sick stuff.
Not first. You've probably heard it before, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Well, what is greed,
you've
Nelson?
experienced it.
Let's talk a little bit about what it is, and then let's explore some of these different manifestations of greed, both individual and corporate, right?
Well, everything I know about greed, I learned from Wall Street.
Yeah, Gordon Gekko, played
Greed
by
is good.
the famous Michael Douglas in Wall Street, said greed is good. And there's a little bit more to that quote, by the way, if you listen to that movie. I don't want to spoil it for you, ladies and gentlemen, but I went last night and watched a little clip or two from that movie just to get the entire context. And what I got to say is the rest of that quote is even better, I think. Nelson, most academics view greed as this insatiable desire for more. They argue it's about getting more of what you want, whether that want is something that's tangible or intangible, right? Money, power, influence, things, even sex partners. It's about acquisition. Now, there is some debate whether or not it's more about acquiring things or if it's about holding on to what you've already acquired. I'd argue it's probably a mixture of both. A former student of mine named Chris, and I think he'd be very impressed that I remembered this, said one time in a lecture I was giving about 20 years ago on motivation that he believed at the heart of all human motivation was this desire to acquire. He called it, Nelson, his shit-getter theory.
He had a theory.
Yeah, his shit-getter theory. He said, we're just, maybe programmed or we've learned to just acquire more and more stuff.
Well, is there an evolutionary component to this? I asked you last week, do we see in nature a tendency by any animal to give? And you said not really. Do we see selfishness in the animal kingdom at all?
Well, obviously with humans, to the extent that we're animals, we see selfishness. Richard Dawkins, the famous evolutionary biologist from Oxford, even wrote an entire book called The Selfish Gene. He says at the microscopic level, from the genes perspective,
okay, yeah.
right, we have selfish genes inside us competing for, well, to make copies of themselves, right? They're competing for resources so that they can stay alive and make copies of themselves. So, by virtue of that, evolutionarily, it makes sense that there's probably some level of greed inherent in all living species, particularly those that have to compete for these finite resources, right? Compete for sex partners to the extent that some or many of these animals
that makes sense.
are reproductive.
But what about
sexually
money?
reproductive. No, but I was going to say, I think non-human animals do hoard as well, right? I don't think there's anything evil inherently in this form of greed or self-interest. I've told you before that I've heard that squirrels, are programmed to just hoard nuts throughout the winter. And, sometimes they hoard hundreds of thousands, if not even more nuts throughout the winter. And the argument goes that, quite frankly, they can't find 99% of the nuts they hide. So they're just programmed to do more and more, which might be a solution to the problem of their forgetfulness.
Right.
But is there some kind of, divine purpose to being greedy? Probably not. I mean, spiritually, religiously, we tend to frown upon greed, don't we? I mean,
No.
one of the
Depends.
7 deadly sins,
Depends.
though, in Christendom is this idea of greed.
Yeah,
this
but,
idea of envying and coveting what others have.
But corporate-minded or business-minded Christians will hold up talents.
Yeah.
The book in the Bible
as an excuse, right? Joel Osteen comes to mind, right? As an excuse, these what are these types of proselytizers called? They're the prosperity gospels.
The prosperity gospels.
Yeah.
Well, you're familiar with talents, right? Because you grew up in a Bible household,
course,
right?
yeah.
What is refresh our memory? What is the story of talents?
Well, I don't know the story of talents. I'm not that fresh. I would need some refreshment myself to truly understand that.
I think it's basically the idea of this guy who is told to do X, Y, or Z with some grains or some seeds that he is given, and he ends up using his talents to expand his givings, his blessings. And the message is pretty simple, right? It's that God wants us to make more money or make more of whatever and be prosperous.
And be more influential, theoretically, right?
Sure,
With your stardom, with your power, with your largesse. I would say some speculate that evolutionarily it would make perfect sense for us to be greedy, if not self-interested, right? To the extent that during our evolutionary past, times were pretty hard, times were pretty capricious, uncertainty was probably the mainstay. So to the extent that you can't, reasonably predict when you're going to get food or when you're going to get a sex partner or when you're going to get good weather, you would need to be almost obsessive about collecting and garnering as many things as possible, particularly food. So I could see how this could benefit you on an individual level, right?
Sure.
Now,
I suppose
whether something is natural doesn't necessarily mean it's good, right? It may be natural for us to be self-interested at times, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. I'd argue that it's about degree and about fit. In terms of degree, we're probably all prone to self-interest to some degree or another. Consider how much toilet paper Americans hoarded during the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Or during an impending hurricane or during an impending tornado. We tend to get really, really, quote, greedy in our behaviors, right?
But see,
when we are insecure.
Differently.
When we're insecure.
See, I don't think greed, as I understand it, comes from a place of genuine insecurity, of real fear about, oh my God, am I going to have enough toilet paper to wipe my ass on Tuesday?
Right.
I feel like when I'm thinking about greed, I am thinking about United Healthcare CEOs and other CEOs and people who live in excess and abundance. I'm thinking about
having more, getting more, wanting more than you could ever use yourself.
I'm thinking
even
about
at
Saudi
the cost
royal
of
family
others.
members. I'm thinking about Qatari family members. I'm thinking about Emiratis. I'm thinking about these types of people who I would classify as as greedy.
Let's take a short break, and when we come back, Nelson, I want you to expand upon this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Whitty, in 2023, United Health raked in a whopping $22 billion in profits, making you the most profitable healthcare company in the country. In fact, by revenue, United Health is the 11th largest company in the entire world.
Thanks again for listening, ladies and gentlemen. We are Put 'em on the Couch. I'm Jason McCoy, right beside my good friend and colleague,
Nelson Boyer.
and we're talking about greed this episode.
Well, we have no
Ebenezer Scrooge comes to mind.
I love
It's the
Dickens.
holiday season. Charles Dickens' story of A Christmas Carol comes to mind. But even Ebenezer Scrooge, Nelson, could be shown the right path, couldn't he? It only took a couple of what?
3 ghosts.
A couple of ghosts. I mean, that wasn't much. This guy had spent pretty much his entire life hoarding and being miserly and being greedy. And he was corporate America, right? He was corporate America. He was emblematic of the problem. And yet, in one quick night, a couple of ghosts come to him and show him how terrible things could be if he continues on this path.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, how good things could be if he only turned sort of to the giving side. You said on the other side, Nelson, that corporate greed is what you're talking about when you think about greed. When you think about an insatiable desire for more, getting more of what you want than really what you need, you think about corporate greed.
We have never seen in this country the level of corporate greed that we are seeing right now.
Specifically healthcare. Talk about that.
Well, look, when you were talking about toilet paper, I was thinking about an innate need for survival. And if there's a fear, I think hoarding...
Even if you take more than you...
I think that's just a
will end up
normal
needing,
human
right.
reaction.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to read this quote. This is from FDR, but, this is one of my favorite FDR quotes. He says, "The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little."
Yeah, that makes sense.
And, and maybe I feel this more acutely during the holiday season. Maybe I feel it more acutely as I continue to pay out the nose for any type of medical expense that my children need, that I need, that my wife needs. But
Despite having insurance, despite paying your
having
premium
insurance,
each and every month, right?
we are failing. I mean, we are absolutely failing in a society where if my daughter gets sick and she has to have an ear surgery, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that costs my family $5,000. That's more than 10% of our of our total income from my salary.
Mm-hmm.
That is sick. That doesn't make any
So
sense.
this
And it's
CEO, Brian
going-
Thompson Nelson of United Healthcare, who was mowed
What did he
down in
make?
cold blood, I don't know, $5 billion a year, who knows, a little more, no less. This guy who obviously was at the helm of these really, really life and death decisions where you deny people coverage or you deny people certain types of procedures. I mean, do you understand the anger, the ire that this guy, Luigi, who allegedly killed him, must represent?
Of course.
I mean, it's not just
Of
this
course.
kid named Luigi who believes that things are problems.
First of all, I denounce violence,
Right.
and I really offer my condolences to,
Brian Thompson's family.
Brian Thompson's whole family, and and his friends. It's horrible. He was murdered, and he shouldn't have been murdered.
But
And there is no but. Full
Okay.
stop. And the next sentence is,
and
I also understand not only that type of rage that he feels, I do understand the response.
But health insurance companies are so hated in this country that Americans from all walks of life have actually been celebrating the murder. A Facebook post by United Healthcare about the shooting has gotten over 80,000 reactions, and over 75,000 of them were ha ha.
The almost folk hero status that he has been, given in some corners of American society.
there definitely seems to be some twisted irony there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, people are saying that the CEO was just a normal person.
I'm sure he was
that
a
he
normal
had a
person.
family. And I would agree, yeah, that's true in many, many ways. But he was also an abnormal person in the sense that he made, arguably more than he could ever spend, and that he was at the helm of a company who make decisions that are not necessarily in the best interest of yours and mine and our families.
Sadly for Brian Thompson,
Yeah.
he is a symbol
Yeah.
of a system that is broken, that is corrupt, that is hopelessly greedy.
Yeah. And unlike Ebenezer Scrooge, Brian Thompson is real. And unlike
Yes.
Ebenezer Scrooge, you can't just sort of make it all better with one stroke of the Hollywood wand, can you?
Yes.
I mean, I wish it were that easy. I wish other CEOs, for instance, having seen what happened to Brian Thompson, right or wrong, would have a come to Jesus moment. What about you?
I
Not because they fear their life, but because,
No,
oh my
but-
God, it demonstrates just the absolute desperation that some people may feel like they've got to go to in order to sort of get someone's attention about how greedy we have become and how inequitable our system has become.
Well, I think the best thing about the Christmas Carol is, and the gift, the genius of the film, isn't that he's shown what good looks like. It's shown that he gets to see how all of his actions
Affect others. Yeah.
and how his death is received.
I'm glad you said that,
And we only
Nelson.
have one life to live. And by the way, I'm not perfect here. I don't know if I'm charitable enough or kind enough, and I try to be. And I think if I had more money, I would be a Mr. Beast type.
Yeah.
But maybe I would
You'd
be
like
a
to
Brian
think that.
Thompson. I don't know, but
Well, look, there is some question about whether greed should be viewed as an emotion, a mood, or some kind of dispositional trait, like a personality trait. I want you to know that most psychologists in the field of social psychology study greed from this dispositional perspective. If for no other reason, then it's pretty easy to measure. There's a 7-question assessment that most researchers use to determine the extent to which someone has what's called dispositional greed, right?
am
And
I
as you
gonna-
might
am I gonna
imagine,
take it?
this dispositional greed scale, known as the DGS, which by the way is the most popular and widely respected. It's been reproduced in many different languages, and it seems to have good validity and reliability across different cultures. Yeah, Nelson, do you want to take it?
Yeah, hell yeah.
So here's what happens. I give you a list of statements.
But wait a minute.
And you tell me the extent to which
How can you
agree or
control-
disagree.
how can
We're
you
not trying to control anything right now. We're just trying to point out that these 7 questions, we know, the answers to these 7 questions tend to be evenly distributed, or what we call normally distributed throughout the population. So most people do score average. A few people obviously score below average, and a few people score above average. And we're not going to necessarily sort of make any value judgments about what that means yet. So,
All right.
And I'm not even trying to score yours, by the way. I don't have the scoring for this. All I can do is give you the statements, and you can just tell me, yeah, do you agree, or
All right.
do you not agree, or are you kind of in the middle, right?
Let's do it.
Number 1, I always want more.
Disagree.
Actually, I'm kind of greedy.
Disagree.
One can never have too much money.
Disagree.
As soon as I've acquired something, I start to think about the next thing I want.
Disagree.
It doesn't matter how much I have. I never am completely satisfied.
Disagree.
My life motto is more is better.
Disagree.
I can't imagine having too many things.
Disagree.
So I wanted you to know that there are people out there who score extremely high on this trait measure of greed. There are people that score, as you know, extremely, as you might imagine, extremely low on this. And then there's the rest of us that score right in the middle. And I think I'm probably somewhere in the middle. But what researchers have done is they've taken these scores and used them to see if people who score particularly high or low correlate with any kind of behavioral outcomes or any kind of cognitive measures. Do you want to guess some of the things researchers have found over the past 10 years, which is about the amount of time people have been looking at this empirically, have found between this trait measure of greed and these other outcomes? Can you imagine? So, for instance, people that score extremely high
think they
on
would
trait
be
greed, what would they be?
narcissistic.
They are actually higher on the personality measure of narcissism, overly inflated sense of self, ego, entitlement. Yep.
I trying to think of other trait.
Think about the dark triad.
Right. So psychotic.
Psychopathy they're higher on, and Machiavellianism.
Okay.
Which
wow.
makes sense probably.
But I wonder if they've also studied if they're more successful than
Yes,
the population.
that's coming.
as a whole.
That's coming. What about negative associations? What do you think they're negatively associated with? If you have really, really high levels of greed, trait greed,
Empathy.
they have low levels of empathy. You're absolutely right. What about their tolerance for deceit, lying,
Very high.
unethical behavior in
Very-
business?
very
Yeah,
high.
they have a high tolerance for that.
Well, because you said they're Machiavellian.
Yep, honesty, humility, agreeableness, all quite low.
Quite
by the way.
low.
All quite low. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, psychologically speaking, how do you think they do on these basic measures of just life satisfaction and mood and happiness?
Quite low.
They absolutely do, right?
Because
So
if
we
you're
find
saying more is,
more is necessary, and there's no end
Enough
to
is
it, right? You
never
can't
enough,
put your
yeah.
finger on how or why more is necessary or when you'll have enough. It leaves you kind of wanting, doesn't it?
Sure.
It's like that train that's traveling down the track, and there's no real destination. It's just accelerating,
Sure.
right? Yeah. So depression, anxiety, stress, those kinds of things are actually negatively associated.
I'm not surprised.
With this trait greed. You know, Paris Hilton has a documentary out, Nelson. I'm not sure if you've heard, where she talks about a variety of
I've
things.
watched it 4 times.
Well, she talks about a variety of things then, as you know.
No, I haven't
And
watched
chief
it.
among them is, her tendency to sort of be a hustler, to grind it out, to basically try to achieve the American dream, right? She talks about her beginning into this socialite club, giving Kim Kardashian her start, being the original influencer,
Yeah.
arguably being the first person to turn the camera around and take a selfie. I don't know if you know that,
Oh,
but
wow.
her sister has a couple of kids, and her sister, you may remember her, Nikki Hilton, is in the documentary, and she's seems to be really concerned about Paris and Paris's well-being, and says, "Look, Paris, you've got a lot of money, you got a lot of influence, you've done everything. I'm just sad for you. You don't have a family, you don't have a kid." At this point, she didn't have a kid yet. This was a couple of years ago. And Paris said, "Yeah, I would love to, but I'm just scared." And Nikki's like, "Scared of what?" She's like, "I'm just scared, of not making it or not having enough." And Nikki's like, "When will enough be enough, Paris? When can you stop, the madness of constantly trying to, as Chris said, my former student, get more shit?" And you know what Paris said?
No.
"I think when I'm a billionaire. I think that'll be the time
That'll
when I
be
can
it, huh?
finally
Oh,
stop.
yeah.
I can finally let it go and enjoy my life." Paris
That's
is
so weird.
around 40 years old now. And I don't know about you, Nelson, but that's kind of sad if you think about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how in the world could anyone be a 500 millionaire or even a 100 millionaire or even a millionaire and feel this pressure, this insatiable urge to sort of greedily continue to take and take and take? I mean, especially in light of recent research that's telling us that people who do this aren't necessarily happier, aren't necessarily less anxious.
I'll give
aren't
you a
necessarily
theory.
less
I'll give you a
depressed.
theory.
Yeah.
Because we always compare ourselves to those around us.
And you know what? I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was going to be my
That's
next
I mean,
topic. What a wonderful segue, Nelson.
A 200-foot yacht is not a 300-foot yacht.
And a $500,000 contract in Major League Baseball is not a $700 million contract.
That's
is it?
right.
I was thinking about this. Can you imagine you work your whole life, you are very, very good at your sport, so good that you get a scholarship to play D1. Then you get drafted early on in professional sports, and you're sitting in that locker room about to really go out and make your debut. And somebody believes in you enough to have given you, say, a $50 million signing bonus and maybe a $75 million contract.
Ooh,
over
except for
5
life.
years, right?
Except for life, man.
And you feel pretty good until the moment you look over there across the locker room.
There's
and you
your
see
star wide
Juan
receiver.
DeSoto, right?
Oh, yeah.
Who
Yeah.
just got a $45 million 12-year contract with the Mets.
Yeah.
And you go, holy crap, I thought I'd made it,
Yeah.
but I haven't yet made it.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't this emblematic of not just self-interest and selfishness, but also emblematic of our economic system, Nelson? I mean, I doubt we would find many economists, Western economists, that would say, yeah, greed is terrible. I think like Gordon Gekko, they would say, well, it's not all that bad, right? It drives our economy. It motivates us to want to go out and research and develop. Working hard can pay some of the dividends. Even
Yes,
if it
that's
means
true.
you are going to be a little less satisfied, couldn't you argue that it's actually lifting a lot of people up? I mean, no other system besides democracy has arguably done more good than it has across time. I mean, look, the Athenians, the Romans, I mean, they had a very rich and powerful civilization for a very long time, not because they were socialist, not because they were some kind of cargo cultist. You could make the case that political systems that have tried to check this kind of wealth, this kind of greed, oligarchy, have failed miserably.
You could. I don't think that's unreasonable, and I also think that's misreading some of the other reasons for success. I mean, that's a very basic post hoc, ergo propter hoc argument, which is, okay, well, there was capitalism and then there was success, so capitalism caused the success.
Well, no, just correlated, not cause.
Capitalism as it exists today, tooth and claw, red-blooded American capitalism is pretty gross.
Gross, sure.
And especially when you look at the broader context of the West
and
the northern versus the
work?
southern. Does it work for whom?
I guess for
whom?
Most.
Jason, more than half of the population on the planet lives with less than $3 a day. What are we talking about
But they're not
here?
capitalist.
They are capitalists.
No, I mean, look, you're a capitalist for sure. You live in a capitalist system.
Look, go to Bangladesh.
Average income in the world is probably what? $10,000, $5,000 a year. I know that to be in the 1% in the world, you only need to make about $50,000 a year. And yet, even though you're part of the 1%, congratulations,
you need to make about,
you don't feel it. You don't feel it.
You need to make more than that now.
$500,000 in America puts you in about what? 1-2%. I mean, and if you make that much money, you certainly don't feel it. Again, I think it goes back to this social comparison. Maybe living in capitalistic cultures makes you more prone to this kind of social comparison. If we were all sort of living in more of a socialistic culture, maybe we'd have no reason to compare one another. And maybe we would be under the illusion that we're in better shape than we really are. I mean, I would argue that most of us believe we're worse off than we are.
Well, look, I was just talking a few months back to some family friends, and they're Eastern European. Mm-hmm. Their family comes, to visit, and I was talking to them. They don't speak English, but they were, sort of explaining some stories from, their time living. They're from they're from Slovakia. They lived under communist rule. Mm-hmm. Now they've had, Western style democracy, capitalism for a while. Mm-hmm. And you ask them, I said, well, what were you happier under? Mm. And they said we were always happier under communism.
How about that?
They were happier.
Any explanation for why?
They said it's exhausting. This constant race to get more, to get enough. And you and I
have the bigger, better, the next best thing, right?
I'm not complaining. We do fine. Yeah. You know about the trips we take and everything. It's a hustle, man.
Yeah, it is a hustle.
I can't have one job. I got to have 6. I mean, it's a constant.
If you want to do it right.
Exactly.
But the question is, are you doing it to keep up with the Joneses? Are you doing it to keep up with your neighbors? Like right now, I've got a, 2014 Kia minivan. It's not loaded except with dust and junk. But that thing gets me from here to there, no problem. A lot of scratches. Only has about 85,000 miles, so I think I'm doing pretty good with a 10-year-old minivan. Nevertheless, I don't want anything more. I see my neighbors. I hear about my friends getting a new this or a new that. And I tell you, when I look at their new cars, I think to myself, wow, how beautiful. But at the same time, I think, what a burden. What a burden to have to pay that new payment. What a burden to have to park that thing so far at the grocery store parking lot so it doesn't get scratched. What a burden that thing is to just own, let alone have to go out and find. I personally like to live a relatively meager life, and my riches, I have to admit, are about sort of leveraging and making good use of my time, a good use of my talents, whatever those are, and just being one with my family.
I would be disingenuous as somebody who has purchased, I don't know, like 150 cars since I was 21. I don't know how many I've purchased.
No.
It's been a lot. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I would have never guessed that.
I cycled through a bunch.
I've known you 10 years. You've only purchased about 5.
Yeah, maybe. I cycled through a bunch of cars.
But when you were younger,
I cycled through a bunch, and so did Amanda. And there is a temporary high, a positive feeling associated with a purchase like that.
Oh, the dopamine rat wheel.
Sure.
Huh?
Look, I'm not gonna. That's disingenuous to suggest that I am beyond such meager considerations.
But as you get older, I mean, wouldn't you say? I mean, research is certainly starting to suggest this, that we tend to get less greedy as we get old. And by the way, women tend to show less greed as they get old as well. Again, Donald Trump notwithstanding. Paul Piff Nelson, I've mentioned him on the show before, I think when we were talking about poverty and his games that he plays in the lab with people, that sort of Monopoly game he plays. Yeah. He comes back to my mind again when we're talking about greed. He did, again, some very interesting creative studies at Berkeley starting about 10 years ago. He took a Monopoly board and he simulated or tried to stimulate greed. And basically, he just took students into the laboratory, gave them extra credit, maybe a couple dollars for their time, randomly assigned them to be a rich player in the game of Monopoly or a poor player. And of course, the rich player got more money when they passed go. They got more dice to roll each time. So they had an advantage right from the start to simulate kind of being born maybe into riches. The poor people only got to roll one die. They got the regular 200 or maybe even less, 100 when they would go around the board and pass go. And what he found was that the richer players, through no effort of their own, were showier, louder, were displaying sort of more cockiness.
Sure.
He had some pretzels and other items in the middle of the table, and they ate more. They seemed to be more impulsive. They seemed to brag. They were more rude. And they tend to suggest in surveys and conversations with him that they believe they won in large part because of some kind of skill at rolling the die or playing Monopoly. Again, not really giving enough, I guess, credence to the notion that a lot of this, all of this perhaps, was just luck. He also found, again, he's found in other studies that, people that drive the most expensive luxury cars are less likely to stop at stop walks for people than people who drive, lower, more compact, more inexpensive cars. What do you think about this notion that greed makes you mean? Makes you less compassionate?
This is purely anecdotal, right? But, do you know a lot of nice, happy, rich dudes? Like or think about their kids. Oh, so many of them are just kind of pricks.
Well, we do know that people who, developmental psychologists and other psychologists who study greed and track people throughout their lifetime find that if you do grow up in a wealthy household, you do score higher on these measures of greed, these survey measures of greed throughout your life than people who grow up in a more poor, I guess, financially insecure household. You were asking me on the other side whether or not there was some benefit to greed. Do greedy people make more money?
I'm sure they do.
Well, I'll tell you this. What we know is the research is kind of mixed. On the one hand, some researchers that have looked at this have found that household income is higher for people who score higher on this greed index. However, individual incomes are not necessarily higher. Now, one way of explaining this might be that greedy people hook up with greedy people, or greedy people hook up with people that they can influence to work harder and make more money. We also find that greedy people are a little less likely to have as many children, which might also explain it, right? So if I don't have as many kids to pay for, then of course I can collect more wealth, right? Greedy people also have more sex partners throughout life. I don't know if you know that.
I did
except
not.
They don't have more kids. So either they are getting cuckolded or they're using birth control more regularly than the rest of us.
Probably birth control.
Yeah. But interesting, nevertheless, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, well, I was thinking back to that gospel, or that the prosperity gospel.
Yeah, religion.
And
what
does it say? But it's.
Oh, you're more likely to inherit the kingdom of earth as a poor person than a rich person. To get into the kingdom of heaven as a rich person is like a camel getting through the eye of a needle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
I mean, that's quite a barrier to spiritual happiness and prosperity.
Yeah, I'll say.
I've talked a lot on this show about Alan Watts, and one of the things that drew me to him was a question that he asked in one of his seminars that I just found so fascinating. And I've asked people this question, and it's a pretty basic question that's kind of hard to answer when we stop and think about it. And it's, if you could have anything right now, what would you want? And I think the reason that's really, and I really want, not just like, oh, that would be nice for a little while, but like, what would it take to make me a happy person? And the reason is you already have the things you want.
Yeah, that's why you can't think of it. That's why you can't think of anything.
Right? And so what we're doing, I think, what greedy people are doing,
externalizing the stuff
just
somehow,
trying
objectifying
to find, just trying to find what's missing.
Yeah, an external or object that represents what we already have.
Right.
In some ways, yeah. In that way, wouldn't you argue that it is almost like this existential pursuit or even this addiction? Some researchers, I think would describe it as an addiction.
Accurate.
With addicts, there's tolerance, there's withdrawal symptoms. There's this indefatigable need to get more and more and more of that drug, right?
Yes.
Oftentimes through no fault of your own. You start with a little, and then before you know it, you're addicted, and you need more and more of it to give you that same sort of dopaminergic high. Likewise, I think it would be easy to compare just greed in general, right? The accumulation or the hoarding of things, whether it be money, power, Pokemon cards, shoes, right? the same sort of neurobiological processes may extend to that as well, to the extent that it's about collecting, hoarding. It's about this insatiable need to keep that object of your addiction flowing.
Well, we talked about money before on this show.
We have.
And I'm pretty sure the research and the science is, inarguable that there is a limit on money buying happiness, that you need a certain basic income level to be as happy as
enough,
you can be.
Right. To have enough happiness to live a relatively normal life, whatever that is, right?
Right, but we
to have
don't-
health insurance, to have a house, to have a car.
But we don't see
if you need that.
this explosion of permanent happiness after
We're-
somebody wins the lottery
And
or
that
after somebody
is
gets a huge
shame,
inheritance.
because even though we all know that, and even though religion teaches us to be more modest, and even though we hear about the
Except for
gross
the size
happiness
of
index,
Jesus'
right?
house, right? His summer home.
Even though we know all of the stuff, there's still this sort of love-hate with greed, isn't there? I mean, there's still so many of us, when you ask how much is enough, like Paris Hilton, she quite literally struggles to put her finger on it. Again, it's an addiction in this way. It's like, I want to lose weight for the sake of losing weight. Well, how much weight would be enough before you would be, satisfied, or where you could live a relatively normal life? And they go, oh, just one more pound. And it never seems to come. It's almost like a disease. Now, don't get me wrong. I think narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and some of these other actual diagnosable disorders do have as a common thread this greed or this self-interest at heart.
Me.
But I'm not necessarily saying that if you are high on a greed scale, you're necessarily disordered. Religions too, Nelson. I mean, we've mentioned that on this show many times, but religion tells us a lot about a lot of things, doesn't it?
They center on frugality.
Most definitions, wouldn't you say, of most religions regarding greed suggest that greed is a selfish motivation, and it's about acquiring more than is fair, that you're getting an excess of things, whether they be resources or things or influence.
Did you ever see?
And at the heart of them suggests that there's some kind of harm. Researchers have found time and time again in lab studies that greedy people take more in games like the ultimatum game, and they take more in like these tragedy of the commons games where you're supposed to harvest stuff and do work and you take only what you need. They end up taking more than they need. Again, it's quite fascinating.
Did you ever see Oh God? George Burns. Remember that movie?
I remember it. Tell me.
John Denver. They were. He was talking to his disciple, his messenger, and he was saying he was talking about a prosperity gospel person.
Yeah.
And he's
talking about you, Joel Osteen. Osteen wasn't around at that point.
No, it was like the late 70s.
Mm-hmm.
But what he was saying was, when he made Adam and Eve naked, he wasn't trying to be cute. He just didn't want to give people pockets, because when you give people pockets,
they try to fill them, don't they?
They try to put stuff in them.
Mm-hmm.
And, he didn't like that. He said he'd prefer people just shut up.
Mm-hmm.
So I really think, there is a commonality throughout our faith systems. And, we've been critical about faith systems here often.
Yeah, we have.
But I do think there's an innate truth in them, and an innate understanding in what it is to be human and what it means to be happy, because they all say some of the same exact things about some of the big questions. And one of those big questions is money. And if you look across our faith systems, we see people who do more with less, who are commanded to give more.
And are happier with less.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And for all the criticism, Nelson, that greed gets, and it sure gets its fair share of attention, specifically when you think about the greediest among us, those that hoard money, wealth, right? Like the billionaires. Elon Musk, I'm talking about you. Now the richest human that's ever walked Earth. Arguably,
he's going to be a trillionaire.
Through no fault of your own, 400 million right now and counting. They sure do get lauded and envied a lot of the time. I mean, yes, 1 out of 100 or 1,000 billionaires gets mowed down in the street. 1 out of 1,000 gets a little criticism on Reddit. But generally speaking, billionaires are liked, lauded, even envied. I mean, and shouldn't they be? I mean, they have gifted society quite a bit through innovation, through research and development, through taking risks that the average person could only dream of taking.
Yeah, but I think that's ridiculous.
But it's still hard. It's hard, isn't it?
It's hard for you to make that argument. That's the dumbest argument I've ever heard in my entire life.
Well, President Donald Trump seems to think that is the
thing.
best indicator of good, right?
Okay.
That being rich. And 50% of Americans voted for Donald Trump. How do we square the circle, Nelson?
They didn't vote for him because of his wealth. They voted because of their own wealth.
Or their own lack of wealth.
Or their own lack of wealth, or their own desire to be wealthy.
So if
and that's
nothing else, don't
understandable.
billionaires give us sort of a beacon to aspire
Oh, God.
to?
Well, no, they don't give us anything.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good then. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies. It cuts through, Nelson.
There's no, I totally
captures
disagree.
the spirit of evolution.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Look, this is a silly way to justify making money off of the backs of other people. That's all it is.
Talking to you, Scrooge.
That is all it is. It is a way for people to alleviate their minimal guilt, which barely exists if it even registers, and make themselves feel and fool society into thinking like, oh, this is all normal. This is wonderful and healthy and normal. It is normal for you, you pauper, you peasant, you peon.
1 Timothy 6:10, greed is a moral flaw that can be overcome. And is that what you're saying, Nelson? Can you make these kinds of aspersions? Can you castigate these billionaires in this way because you secretly know that within each and every one of them, there's a little Grinch heart just waiting to grow if only they see their little Susie Q, or what was the little girl's name?
No, I'm
in the
not
Grinch?
that naive. No, they're Cindy Lou Who.
All they need is
who
a
is
Cindy
no
Lou
more than
Who,
two.
right? They only need a Cindy Lou. Like, we could grow Elon Musk's heart if we could just introduce him to the next little Cindy Lou.
I don't.
Are these billionaires incapable? Do you think there's something like rotten at the core with them? Or do you think, look, Sarah McLachlan and a couple of sad dogs would do the trick?
No, I don't think they would give two shits about Sarah McLachlan or a couple of sad dogs. I remember
no transformation for them.
I remember a story in Mary Trump's book about
that's Donald Trump's cousin or something like that.
Niece. And it was a story recounted to her by Ivanka Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And Ivanka and Donald were walking outside of Trump Tower. This is in the early 2000s, maybe late 90s, when, believe it or not, Trump bankrupted a casino, which is still really impressive. And they see a poor guy sitting there on the street, and Trump says, look at that, if I had a quarter more, we'd have the same amount of money, which is kind of awesome that Trump managed to be a dick to a poor person and compare himself to a poor person.
That's hard to do, isn't it?
I mean, look, I know his liquidity, his cash flow. I mean, if you're in real estate, you don't have as much cash on hand. I get that. But still, that's impressive that you're that much of a heartless Scrooge. That you see a poor person, like, if I had a quarter more, I'd have as much as he does.
So are the Trumps and the Zuckerbergs the Warren Buffetts and maybe not Warren Buffett, but and the Elon Musk, are they on this quest for more wealth and power because of some personal desire for domination and greed? Or do you think they are embodying in some way this capitalistic ethos of success and technological innovation? I mean, come on. Put on your political science hat. Put on your...
No, I am. We're focused on two very different things. I'm not interested in the individuals. I mean, I'm judging them because you're asking, and I think owning that much and having that much is
well, you're not even
disgusting.
an individual anymore because you've got more than most countries on this earth. If you have 400 million,
yeah, I'm talking
billion.
about FDR.
Yeah.
I'm talking about a society that is not doing enough for people, and that is why President Trump.
So
won.
you wake up tomorrow morning, and it's Freaky Friday or Freaky Thursday, right?
Are we Freaky Friday?
It's Freaky Thursday tomorrow morning, and lo and behold, Nelson Beaulieu's personality, memories, IQ, empathy is transmuted into Elon Musk's body. And Elon Musk's greed, ideas, narcissism, weird views on AI and interspecies communication is inside Nelson Beaulieu's head.
Okay.
What do you do as you're walking around inside his body? Day one. You only have 24 hours. What do you do, man?
All right. First things first is...
Do you meet with Trump?
The first thing I'm doing is I'm going to look at a penile enhancement because there's no way that this guy is not compensating for something. With
$400 billion.
With the stupid trucks.
Mud flaps and big wheels are a lot.
With the stupid trucks and the stupid
nobody's
rockets.
penis is that small.
That's a small penis.
Okay, so you want to look into micropenis surgery.
We're going to look at that.
Going to shore that up a little bit.
That's first. Second of all, I'm spending everything.
Really?
I'm spending it all. I'll leave him $100 billion. I'll take 400, 300 billion and really do something with it. Yeah, really do something with it. And I wouldn't spend it because I don't know enough to spend it. I would give it to organizations who know how to fix the problems.
Right. You go to some of those places that we talked about in the last episode, right? Like Spent Well or Give Well. Some of these places that track these dollars and do the absolute
and by the
best
way,
you can
I'll
do.
leave him with
and you don't
$100
think this
billion.
ugly truck or this dick rocket would do it?
No. No. And I'm not saying that those inventions and those things can't add value to a society. I am saying that the
there
bigger
are people without
problem,
health care. There are people who are
Exactly.
poor. There are people who are basically living hand to mouth.
Yeah.
And
that's-
how much good could you do, Nelson? Think about that, man.
Oh,
you ever
it'd be a
fantasize
blast.
about how much good you could do?
Yes, often. When I play a lottery game for like 5 hours, just thinking about all the fun I'd have given, and now being one of those dudes who announces to an entire Walmart, "Hey, everybody, take your shit in 5 minutes and get out of here."
Call up your
paid for.
taxi driver in Namibia or wherever you were in Africa, Uganda, right?
Yeah,
Jefferson,
buy my
what was his
house.
name?
Davis.
Call up Davis. Say, your ship has come in, Davis.
Yeah, let's
you,
go.
your wife, and your family.
Bring everybody.
Yeah.
Let's go to America.
Yeah, how cool would that be, man?
It'll be a blast. It'll be a
an
blast.
absolute blast. Be an absolute blast. Well, Nelson, we're getting close to the hour, if you can believe that. What a fun conversation this has been.
Yeah, but
I'm
before
not
we go,
sure it's going to be fun for our listeners because I don't know that we've given any kind of constructive sort of ideas about where we can go from here, right? After this show is over, people still feel the brunt of this massive inequality, the likes that we've not seen perhaps in recorded history. We still see people dying from preventable diseases and dying from a lack of access to good health care to treat these very treatable diseases, not just across the globe, but right here in America. People are still going hungry. People are still being laid off at the same time that corporations are recording massive profits, right? What can we say to those people that are genuinely hurting, that genuinely do not feel like they are getting any benefit of this capitalistic, greedy system?
I would say it's cold comfort, but this isn't how it's always been. It's been a lot worse than this for most of history. I would say that capitalism, for all its flaws, is the one system that has created a mechanism for some minimal upward mobility, that it has lifted people up out of poverty, out of crushing, wrecking poverty.
But we still have to recognize that there is a tendency to backslide.
We are definitely backsliding.
To grow more wealth than you need. There's a tendency maybe to take advantage of, use some unsavory, unethical means to sort of pad your own pockets, as we've talked about here on this episode. You know, I think we still have to think about capitalism with regulation, don't we? I know that's something that doesn't always square with your most pure economist, pure capitalist, but I'm an Elizabeth Warren fan. I believe that we absolutely have to put brakes in place and checks and balances in place. And anymore, it seems like every attempt for a politician or for a legislature to even talk about it, others will quickly pounce on them and say, "Oh, you're anti-capitalist. Oh, you're communist."
Look, Trump is thinking about getting rid of the FDIC, which is just, any regulation that we can try to find, I guess, is where we're at. And I don't think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that cutting all regulation benefits the economy to any broad.
Well, I haven't heard you talk about
degree,
cutting any regulation that will help the absolute rich. FDIC is something that, as you know, will help people who have less than a couple of $100,000 in the bank.
The FDIC is a regulator, so not only do they insure deposits, but they also are bank regulators.
Yeah.
What they would do in this case is move the deposit insurance piece over to Treasury and remove all regulation, because who needs, the last thing you want when it comes to banks, and this is true, is regulation. That's what we learned from 2008, right? In 2009, the banks, after the crash, they were terrified. They were panicked, right?
Sure.
I mean, they almost blew up the economy. And they went to the regulators and they went to the major
And
central
begged, didn't
banks. They said, we need regulation.
Yeah.
We're too greedy. We're
Yeah.
too greedy.
They recognized it.
They literally said, we are too effing greedy.
And we can't trust ourselves.
We
gotta
cannot
do
be
something
trusted.
For us, right?
We cannot
It's
be.
like that kid who says, Mommy, I need to have a rule. I can't stop myself.
And we forgot. We forgot. In 2010, 2011, they were making money. Man, they fought tooth and nail against the Dodd-Frank Act and anything that even smelled of regulation. And we will be back. We will be back. You know, there's a lot of, people use the word Marxism, Marxist. They throw it around. They don't understand Karl Marx's ideologies,
Give it
his
to us, Nelson.
theories.
Final words.
They really don't. But the thing that people focus on as historians when it comes to Marxist historiography, Marxism, is that he speaks to a fundamental truth in our collective history about people who own the means of production and laborers. And until we resolve that, and we were on the track with unions, we were on the track with these regulations, with we had a
Minimum
system.
wage.
We were on the path, and then greed took over again. In the
the pendulum
70s
swung
and the
back the other
80s and the 90s, and now we're here and we're in a shit place. And I mean, people only can take so much. Marx said, and this is why we've never seen Marxism at work. We've seen Leninist Marxism, which is a totally different thing, right? These workers of the world unite. Workers of the world unite, because he prophesized, I suppose, that eventually people are going to say, F off. Your banks and your banks are worth nothing without my brains, and your factories aren't worth dick without my hands to move them. And I've had enough, and I want a piece of the action. And I think until we reach that stasis, that equilibrium, you're always going to have societal strife.
Nelson, from your mouth to God's ears, I appreciate you and I appreciate this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate all of you, and we hope each and every one of you have a wonderful day, a great weekend, and a very, very Merry Christmas.
Play us out with some jingle bells.
Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh. Oh, we have a lot of fun. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Oh, what fun it is to ride in a one-horse open sleigh.